Alright everyone, welcome back to our return to Borderlands 3. We're here playing again. It's been a hot minute since I played. I've been kind of away from playing the game. Haven't really checked anything, but we're here now doing the Slaughter Shaft. Let's see what we have. I've kind of skipped doing some of our stuff. Our stuff is a little under-leveled since we're out 57 now, but we're using a little under-level stuff. But I think we should be able to manage since we don't have anything too crazy. I put most of my other stuff away. I don't really think I have anything crazy in my inventory. I changed up my skill tree before I started recording. We went a little bit more. We went down to red tree or hunter to get megavore, a little bit more of green tree just to get down to lick the wounds and turn tail and run, a little bit of blue tree to get some of this stuff that we need. We don't really need psycho head on the stick, but but we could use it. We mostly want frenzy and heat bite. That's our two big ones. Anything else? We got a little bit more or our guardian rank, but nothing too crazy. We still have some other stuff to do over here with guardian, the vault cards and all that. But I think we should be able to take it. I did a bit of a test just to see how we do. But I think we should be all right. But yeah, it's been a minute since I played the game. I've been dealing with a lot of kind of not really wanting to play the game, but I've been kind of dealing with other like personal stuff, like other like home issues, like things breaking and having to wait to them to get repaired and having to fix them myself and deal with that. But now we're here. I'm here playing because haven't really touched the game. I did play Borderlands 4 because I mean, since this week a lot has happened with Borderlands 4. Obviously, I think Bloom and Reap dropped recently, and I didn't get to really talk about that. But I did play and check out Bloom and Reap. He's honestly pretty cool. He's not like too crazy. He's like I said, he's kind of more of a tame boss, but he can be really difficult, mostly because of the way his arena is. If you don't know, he's basically a creep, which is like this like plant little monster enemy, which is a new enemy type in the game. He's basically like a big tough version of it. He's not too difficult. I didn't really try him out with all of the characters, mostly just with Harlow. And I tried with Amon, but I didn't really do really good because Amon's not the most powerful unless you have a really specific build, which I haven't really built him out for that. But the main issue is basically his arena. He's like very difficult. It's easy to get knocked off the map. There's a lot of like platforming and jumping around. That's kind of like one of the big issues with it. But some of the legendaries are pretty cool. There aren't too many legendaries, I think, off the top of my head. I think it's the class mod, which all the class mods I think are pretty good. There's the one sniper rifle that's like the one that you get guaranteed for getting platinum. There's I forget what that is. Basically, it's the like Globetrotter reimagined as like another launcher, and then there's the other grenade, the Urchin I think it's called, and then there's the Mantra, which is like the big new what do you call it? Shield or not shield? Basically shotgun, malone shotgun. But it's basically like this game, that game's face puncher, where basically it shoots melee, does melee damage, and it's basically like another way to like deal melee damage. Melee is always kind of like I said, it's really powerful, but mostly with Amon and I think Vex are like the two big ones. Because Rafa kind of does melee, but I think with Rafa there's a lot more like, gun-specific stuff, like infinite ammo, unless you're using like his arc knives, which is kind of like the whole point of the melee, where you're going around running melee people. But I don't know, it's like I haven't really used it. I think I only got like one, but it wasn't a very good one. Because like I said, the drop rates are kind of and I haven't really been farming them. Because I've gotten a bunch of like the class mods, and I've been trying to test them out. Because I know some of them kind of have become like meta, or they kind of have slotted in to replace like some of the other legendary class mods. So I know some of the class mods aren't really like, they're not like hard meta, or like, you're not really using them as much, especially with some of the Amon class mods. So I know his was it the lamplighter, I think it's called, the one, I forget exactly what it does off the top of my head, but I think it like gives them more cooldown or like critical hits and cooldown and gun damage. And then I think the Harlow one, I think it's called the Trooper, which is basically like ordnance and gun damage, or every time you use ordnance you get gun damage and some other stuff, or action skill damage. You can kind of like keep spamming your grenades, or keeping your launcher out. I forget what I think it's like it's not I forget what the Vex one is called, but basically the one with that one like the cursed daggers, where you kind of like can like debuff or weaken enemies. And then things, or not things, Rothman is something with I think also with action skill, or keeping his it's the movement speed. The more movement, faster he moves, the more damage he does. That's kind of his main thing. But they're pretty decent. I mean, like I said, I think like now Blue Reaper is a pretty fun fight. He's not like the most crazy overpowered thing, because it's just go to him and fight him. I'm not a fan of like the time trials. I think I get why they kind of did it to kind of encourage speed running, where if you speed run and get the platinum, you guaranteed get the the Ripper sniper rifle. That's kind of really powerful, and you can also get a chance at the legendary enhancements, because it's pretty difficult to get enhancements in that game. But yeah, still pretty not too difficult. Like I said, also the Game Awards happens, and as I kind of predicted, the Claire Obscure kind of won everything and kind of beat everything, and there wasn't anything like too like big reveal, I guess, for me. But other than like that one game, was it High Guard, that like hero shooter game that everyone's kind of been talking about, or I guess the new Tomb Raider, which I never was really a fan of Tomb Raider, especially like not like the old ones, or like kind of like the weird like spin-off ones, or like on like the 360 and PS3 and that kind of era. Because I know I tried to get into it, but I never really did. And then they released the kind of like HD like remake, or I guess remaster of the old games, of like the really old original like set. Now they're making another reimagining, or even more like reimagining, I guess, yeah, reimagining of like the new, of like the first was it Tomb Raider game, and then they're making like another like indirect sequel. I guess not sequel, but like a new like canon or a new storyline that kind of takes place after or maybe during the events of like the first one, where now it's like an established young Laura Croft going and doing what she does, instead of maybe doing like another, telling like basically a new story with her. But I'm not sure if it's like connected to her original story. Going down a lot, but we should be doing, like I said, we gotta have to get this new scene to really help us. But like I said, I'm not really a fan of the launch of the Tomb Raider, but I think it'll be interesting to see what they do with it. I mean, like I said, I guess there wasn't really anything too crazy at the Game Awards. I mean, like, Claire's career pretty much won everything, but honestly, I didn't think they would. I figured they would maybe throw something out, like, or was it some of the other games, like Death Stranding, or maybe even Hollow Knight, where they got something, considering how, like, the games are so popular, they can kind of help. They were, like, so, like, I guess, meta. Like, everyone was talking about them, and they were kind of, like, a big deal for a lot of people. So seeing them not really get anything like crazy or win any big awards, it's kind of like a weird thing to see, interesting thing to see, especially for a game like Clear Secure. We're doing pretty well. We're not struggling too much with, pardon me, with the slaughters, because I remember I came to do this kind of a little bit before I started recording, and I was kind of struggling, but I managed to get this Lucian call, and I think it's going to be carrying up. We still have our other boomer. I think we got that from the last playthrough. I also got that this companion. The companion keeps calling back to me. Maybe we'll use our boomer for a little bit, but the companion is pretty decent. But right now we're still on Mayhem 1, so we're just kind of slowly kind of building up and leveling up. Because once we get into like hard Mayhem, it's really when the game kind of, the hard, like the line kind of, the DPS check kind of gets put in place, where we got to really use the hard meta guns and not kind of just use whatever. But with Flak, you can kind of get away with using whatever, because Flak is kind of the more stronger of the character, where you can kind of get away with using kind of the more like average guns, or guns that are like really strong early on, or in this kind of like early Mayhem 1 to like Mayhem 3, kind of Mayhem 5. Because once you get to Mayhem 6, it's when the game kind of really gets more difficult in the scaling. And then once you get to like Mayhem 11, even though Mayhem 10 and up, or Mayhem 11 is kind of where we want to be, because Mayhem 11 is kind of Mayhem 10 without any modifiers, which is what we want. We don't really want to worry about the modifiers, and so those modifiers are really annoying compared to what, I guess they're better compared to what they were back when like Mayhem 4 and 3 were out, or I guess it was Mayhem 3 or 4, where it was like the raw stats, where it was like everything was like plus this or minus damage, or plus damage for enemies. Enemies get bonus projectiles on their guns. And pretty much all the enemies were these badass zealots with these ball-head launchers that were pretty much like one-shot you. Then you would have other things where you would just get minus damage of your main weapon, which was really annoying. So I guess maybe it's a little bit better to change it to those more like gameplay skills. We need to just level up, so let's make sure we put the points in there. And round 2. We also put on there's the auto sell feature, where you can sell stuff below like green or white. So now we have that. So I've been using that to kind of sell all this other stuff, because we've been getting a lot of greens. Hopefully we get some more legendaries. I would like to get some more, because this used to be the thing, was to do this before you get all your legendaries, because badasses were dropping so commonly. But I think they still drop pretty often at lower level. or at lower mayhem, because even at higher mayhem you can kind of play through this and not get really anything. That's one of the main issues. Speaking of other things, we can maybe talk about Marvel Rivals. They have their right now the Christmas event or Christmas thing. I think the Jeff event is going on where they do like the Splatoon with Jeff and you can paint everything, compete with other little Jeffs. And you get all the Christmas skins with them with Squirrel Girl, Star Lord, Winter Soldier, and I think Penny Parker. I think maybe there's another one too. Or they're gonna release the other ones maybe later on. That's kind of like the main big ones I've seen where everyone like talking about how they look. And I guess the Jeff recolors for his like first like winter skin. And I know like with that, they also I guess the other big thing at the game was they showed off Deadpool, which I remember talking about that, saying Deadpool was kind of like a leaked character that maybe they're gonna bring, and then they brought back, I think her name was Elsa Bloodstone. She's kind of like this bounty hunter slash mercenary character who's like hunts monsters, and she's kind of there fighting Deadpool. She's gonna be like the next character. We only see like a little like animation of her, so we don't really see her character model. I know they kind of showed Deadpool's character model in the game. And he's kind of like there and being like teased as like a little meta reference to him because how he's kind of like breaks the fourth wall, I guess you would say. Which is a cool little area, like repping. I'm curious to see how he kind of plays, but we still got a bit ways to go before we kind of see more of him. We leveled up again. It's almost Christmas time. Christmas, like I said, Christmas is always a weird time. I kind of been like, I guess the reason why I wasn't playing because, like I said, there was a bunch of like issues of, like with my apartment or I guess house or how you refer to it, like where I live, and like things were breaking and you had to wait to fix them and you had to try to deal with it. And it was just like, oh, I don't want to deal with this. And, I don't know. Just Christmas is like, I guess because like I said, Christmas is supposed to be like a happy time of the year, and then you kind of like thinking about, but then you think about like, oh my god, the year is almost over. You know, 2025 is coming to an end, and 2026 is kind of like around the corner. And I guess if you're someone with my age, like 2026 is kind of like that kind of like beginning of like the end, because 2025 is like the halfway point, I guess, for like age, and I like, well, now I'm kind of like seeing, like feeling like trying to feel old, I guess. They kind of talked about that with like how like, oh, well, the gaming industry's in this weird position because now with like the potential of like the PS5, or not the PS5, like the PlayStation 6, this Xbox whatever, or the series or the Steam machine and all of this, kind of seeing this new age of gaming, or like this new types of consoles and the new types of ways people play games, or the types of like the way I guess Microsoft and Sony and I guess Steam and all those other want to kind of sell video games now. I don't know, you kind of like get that weird feeling of being old and like kind of not being in the right position, or like seeing people your age like do things that maybe you're not ready to do, or kind of jump into something like, well, am I ready to, you know, get married, get engaged, or have kids? Because you know that's kind of like the, I guess, point where you're kind of at, where you're like, you kind of get that like feeling of like, oh, like, am I not even in the ready to get really? I'm not in that like position to like get married or do any of that. I kind of feel like, well, maybe I should be, like, why am I not there? It's like you kind of feel like you're kind of like not in the right position to be, or you're kind of like a letdown, or you kind of let yourself down by not allowing yourself to have what you need. I don't know. It's hard to explain, but basically what I'm saying is like you get like that sense of like, oh, I'm not. Maybe I'm like kind of a failure, or I'm not where I need to be for a person my age. Like, considering that other people your age or even a little younger are already like doing stuff like that, and like they're already kind of like living their lives, and you're kind of still struggling to figure out where do I want to be. Oh, we died. God dang it. Oh well. I think we would die, but we should be fine since we keep going for another round. But yeah, I don't know. This is like, I guess the Christmas is a kind of a weird time because it's meant to be like happy. You get to see your family. You get to like see all the nostalgia of like the past. But then you kind of think about that and you're like, well, now here you are. And like how things have changed. Everything's not the same as it was before. But like the future is like scary, I guess, for someone like if you get older, because you don't really know where you're gonna be. Because everyone's kind of like, well, I want to do this, I want to do that, but things happen to where you're like, well, that kind of let down, or maybe I didn't get to the thing I wanted, get what I wanted. You know, your 5-year plan becomes, well, now what's my new 5-year plan is going to be going on to like even being older. I don't know, it's just a weird feeling. And I kind of get that, getting that feeling, even though it's wasn't something I was feeling before. But now I guess I am. Which I guess is kind of just the part of like becoming an adult or growing up even more than I already was growing up. I mean, I guess when you're in the kind of younger phase, you're kind of like waiting to get older. Like I guess if you're like 18 or like 19, you're waiting to be like 21 or 22 and start to like be more seen as an adult, even though you technically are an adult. But once you get to that point, you're like, well, now I have to do even more adult stuff. Or you're gonna start kind of like picking and choosing what kind of life you want to live or what kind of relationship you want to have, or where you want to be in life. I guess both in like terms of like a job or a career, or in terms of like relationship or having a family. So I'm sure there's a lot of people. I guess a lot of people are kind of also like that. But I guess once you're older and you already have that, and if you kind of already have like a family or are married and have like kids, and you're like, okay, well now I'm just waiting for, like you kind of accept it, but like seeing your kids get older and seeing them not be like little babies and seeing them become like teenagers who hate you or don't want to like, interact with you, because that's kind of like every, I guess, parent or adult will go through at some point. Because I guess everyone kind of has that phase where they like not necessarily hate their parents, but they kind of like don't want to hang out with their parents because their parents are like now old and yucky. I guess it depends if you have more, I guess like if you have like a good relationship with your parents, which I don't know, I guess I kind of do and I kind of don't, because there were times where I guess I didn't like my parents or I was like fighting with them. I guess there was times where I was kind of the bad guy, and I guess sometimes they were the bad guy, and it's like that kind of tug and pull of like who's really the bad guy. But I guess you kind of can't blame your like I guess teenage son or daughter for like not liking you when you're kind of being too rough on them or being mean or being too hard on them or expecting them to like achieve so much and deal with all the stress of being like a young person, especially nowadays, because everything is kind of more stressful now, I guess. You know, if you're like, oh, I want you to be the top of the class, I want you to have straight A's, I want you to be, you know, a doctor or a lawyer or some type of like a successful business person and kind of prove yourself. And then you're like, well, now I have to go this, I have to worry about school, I have to get good grade, and you know, considering that, especially if you're like just entering high school or you're maybe just finishing high school or in that kind of weird point where now everything is really stressful. I don't know, it's like that weird feeling. And I guess maybe sometimes as a parent you kind of forget that you were a kid once. Because even now as like someone who's like in their mid-20s, you know, you kind of forget what it's like to be a teenager. You're like, look at these kids, man, they don't know, and you're like, wait a minute, I was just like them, you know, you did dumb things, you said stupid things, and you didn't really appreciate what you had. But sometimes you kind of were right, where your parents were kind of like, they didn't like treat you right or kind of listen to you, kind of saw you as like just a dumb teenager and not like taking what you said seriously. I guess it's kind of like a feeling that everyone kind of goes through. I guess as you get older, like especially if you're like someone who's already a bit older or someone who comes from a culture or for her parents come from a culture where that's not like being, like you said, you want your kids, you want your son or daughter to be good and be like successful and things like, well, here they are, they're here in, you know, America or the West, and they have all these nice things. Like, why can't you? You should be successful. You have some, considering how rough it was, you know, being in the old country or from the whatever homeland or whatever ancestral place you came from. Because that's something kind of, I guess, something my dad would always say. Like, oh, back when I was a kid, we didn't have this, we didn't have all of these things. And because of that, you should be grateful. And you're like, I don't know, because I guess you should be, but you also kind of have to realize that the world is a different place. Even for like a young person, despite having everything, you don't really have everything. Where it's like hard to like express yourself or like be like the feeling of stress of like trying to be like this best version, and when the world's like not in a good position. Like especially during like the pandemic or like during like these other like hard times where everything is expensive. You know, if you're like, hey, you know, I went to school, I went to college, I got a good grades, I did all this, and what's my reward? You know, debt or you know a job that doesn't pay well. Like trying to like save money, as much money as I can. You need to be able to afford, you know, all the quote unquote things that you need. That maybe your parents were kind of able to get by not having to pay as much. I guess. You know, it's like that mindset of you want to work hard, but you also don't want to. You realize that working hard kind of isn't going to pay off in the end for some people. I don't know, it's just a weird feeling. Like, I guess everyone kind of goes through that feeling. And like, no one really understands each other because, you know, that's just how it is. You know, we forget that we were young people or young adults, or we don't we're not able to kind of see in front of ourselves and see like how hard it is for some young people, especially if you're like a parent, like that type of like immigrant or like that kind of like old way of thinking or old world where the past is very different than it was, you know, like being like a teenager or a young adult in like the 90s or in the early 80s or 70s or even 60s for some people. It was very different than being, you know, a teenager now in the 20s or a young adult in the 20s now, because, you know, everything has changed and everything is different. I don't know, it's everything is kind of just sucks, but I guess things will get better for some people as long as you like kind of keep trying. I guess that's how I kind of feel, where I kind of like have this goal, but I like just want things to get better without like. But I also have that feeling where maybe things don't get better, something gets worse, and then you know, there's always something new basically that kind of like adds to it. Because you get those moments where you don't really think about like anything, you know, something happens or like an emergency happens or something happens. You get kind of like stuck in the moment, and you realize that maybe you're not where you need to be, or you're kind of behind, and it kind of like messes you up, I guess. You kind of like just have to stop and like wait a minute. Or maybe I'm not like the best version of me, or maybe I kind of been slacking, I guess is the best way to put it. Because I guess I've kind of had that feeling every once in a while. And there's those moments where you kind of like are focused more on like what's in front of you than focus on like the future. And then you see other people kind of being successful or doing things that you maybe want to do, and then they're living their best lives, and you're like, well, why am I in that point in my life? You know, like, what are they doing that I'm not doing? But then it's like, well, is it my fault or is it something else's fault? And you start, you know, you kind of have to like blame yourself, but also blame society, because that's what every person does. You know, they blame everyone else. You know, leave it to young people to blame the older generation, and leave it to the older generation to blame the young people for being lazy or being too busy worrying about meaningless stuff like avocado toast and, I don't know, video games and spending money on it. Like, you would have a house if you didn't spend all your money on gacha games or on skins in Overwatch or Call of Duty or Fortnite or Marvel Rivals, because, you know, I need that, you know, the summer skin for Invisible Woman or in Mantis. It was like, well, maybe it's because everything is expensive, but I don't know, you kind of have to have that like self-awareness, especially because it's your life, and you kind of have to pick and choose what kind of life you want to live. I think there's a lot of people who kind of want like what their parents had, but they also see how hard their parents worked or how rough it was for some people. Because even though it was quote unquote cheaper back then, maybe it wasn't always easy back then, considering how hard some of your parents or some of the people in your life had to work, or like how rough it really was, especially coming from a place that maybe like coming from like the immigrant background, where maybe you came from a country that was in like huge political and cultural turmoil, or now you're like, well, do I want to live in that life? And seeing your parents, you work multiple jobs, or having to like deal with so much stress, and dealing with you being an angsty, you know, a wild, crazy kid, or an angsty teen who always complains and whines, and then you kind of become that, you know. You kind of like have that self-realization that, you know, maybe my parents' life wasn't this perfect thing, but, you know, it's always been rough for everybody. And you kind of just have to deal with it, or deal with the punches. But yeah, that's kind of my little, like, I guess, rant. I've just kind of been thinking about that stuff, and it kind of like bothers me every once in a while. I'm sure there's a lot of people like that. Or I guess a lot of people kind of get that feeling, because even if you have everything, you know, you may think like, oh, well, you know, I want to get married, I want to get engaged, or have a family, and you realize how rough it is, or maybe something bad happens. You know, heaven forbid something bad happens. And it kind of like makes you realize, well, why did I do this? Or is it worth the risk doing this? Or putting yourself in that position, especially when it comes to like risking it. But I guess that's kind of like every day is a risk. You know, every day you walk out of your house, you know, you're risking, you know, dying or having to deal with something that you may not want to. You know, you get that feeling like, you know, why did I get out of bed? You know, if it meant, you know, having to deal with some crazy person or someone at your job who annoys you or says something mean, or maybe you work in like retail or in a restaurant, and some like person comes up to you and gives you a hard time. You're like, oh, why did I even bother? Why didn't I do this instead of that? You know, you get those kind of feelings every once in a while. I guess to kind of go on a later level, we can talk more about like the Game Awards. I don't know. I guess the Game Awards never. Like I said, there wasn't anything too crazy. Laura Croft, there was the new Tomb Raider. I think there was obviously the High Guard game, which everyone's been kind of talking about, which this is something I kind of talked about in my other part where I was about like these new indie studios coming out and kind of doing the same, kind of becoming the new standard, but I guess they're kind of falling in the same trap because, you know, like, I guess the high guard, I think that's what it's called, but high guard is made by like a handful of people from, you know, EA / Respawn, you know, people who made Titanfall / you know, Apex Legends, or you're going and trying to like step away and be like, hey, you know, we don't want to be under the clutches of EA because EA is evil and corporate, but then we're gonna make this game that feels very corporate and very lackluster. It's like you broke away to make basically a game that you wouldn't make even if you were in your working for EA. I guess the game wouldn't be bad, but I guess like the problem is that a game like this, seeing how much money and energy and this being like your first big thing, like is it gonna be able to like sustain itself, because, you know, everything is so expensive. You know, you need a big game, you need to sell $1 million, you need to have, you know, 10 million players or sell a lot of copies and really get people to keep playing, you know, 'cause that's just how it is, because it is so expensive. And, you know, and I guess now the kind of the hero shooter genre, or the kind of free-to-play genre, is kind of like in this weird where people are tired of it, and any game that looks just too generic or doesn't offer enough isn't going to really kind of pull people in, because people are kind of, I guess if you're set in stone, like some people will leave, like if you're like someone who maybe like, you play like Call of Duty, or like you play like Overwatch, and you maybe jump from Rival, because Marvel Rivals is kind of like the lightning in the bottle, I guess, for like companies like NetEase or Marvel or / Disney, because, you know, making some, because that game could have easily been like a flop, or been really like, you know, it would have flopped, it would have just been, or would have moved to being more of a generic, like, I don't know, like mobile game, or a game that's only really popular in a very particular like audience, or like in a, maybe like in China or like in that kind of Asian market. But, you know, I guess kind of losing my train of thought. I guess the idea is that, you know, you go and make this game, and now you're like, now you have to basically make a game that people want, but also make a game that you want to make. But if you're like someone who's like, well, I don't know how to make like a first person, I guess, not first person, but a story-driven narrative game with complex, you know, like a complex RPG, or a game with expensive world building and characters and role playing and all of these and all of this lore. And you're like, well, I only know how to make this game, kind of make a hero shooter, or I know how to make that kind of stuff. But I guess the audience, the community is saying we don't want more hero shooters, we want, you know, something new. But I guess we don't really know what the new thing is right now. Everyone's kind of still like trying to figure that out, because, you know, there was a time where it was, you know, battle royales was like the hot new thing, and everyone wanted to make a battle royale, or the rise of like the free to play and moving from loot boxes and other things like that to more of like free to play skins and cosmetics. And so many games have become so successful from it, but a lot of people have become very, like, I guess, cynical to it, where they don't want to spend, you know, hundreds of dollars on a game, or play a game that's, you know, that feels like the same game, because, you know, like I said, there really isn't like what the new next big game is. It like what type of like genre is it going to be? That's kind of what I talked about with like how like indie games are kind of taking over, or like kind of be like the new thing, where some like little small indie roguelite or little like what do they call them, French slap games are going to be like the new popular game, where you might see these big studios try to take advantage of that, but then you see these like smaller studios, people who, like I said with High Guard, they leave and then they go and say, oh, we're going to make this game, but this game isn't like what people really want, or it's like, it's basically the same thing as if it was made by EA or by, you know, Activision or Ubisoft or any of these other big companies, because it just offers the same thing, because everyone wants that, you know, piece of the pie. Everyone sees how much money it can make, and there is so much, I guess, so much investment in it. But especially if you're like a small studio, where, you know, if you're like a team of like, I don't know, 10 people or 20 people, and you're trying to get like a big thing, and you're like, well, we're going to make this game because this is what the investors want. This is what's going to make a lot of money. You know, you show it to investors saying, look at how much money we can make. We can make $1 billion. And everyone's like, well, yeah, okay, I'll give you some money if you make $1 billion and you pay me back. But now it's like, well, now that you've teased the game and everyone's already hating it, it's like, are you even going to be able to really make a lot of money? Or does the game even have, the game was basically doomed to fail before they even released it. It's basically the mindset. Kind of like with that Bungie and Sony with was a Marathon, where even if Marathon is a good game, like Marathon is kind of like become so hated, and with all the controversy with it, It's like even if it's good, like it needs to be even better, and I don't think it has that market because people are just not willing to spend millions of dollars, and most people aren't going to drop whatever they're playing now to go and play a game like this. Like if you're a fan of, like even if you're like a fan of Destiny 2, I don't think Destiny 2 players are going to go drop everything to go play, you know, Marathon or what is it like, or Escape from Tarkov or those other like hero extractive shooter games that is like I guess the new like pretend like the new what the big executives think is the new like type of game to make or the hero shooter free to play game. You make that and you're like, well, we have to make that, but people aren't just going to drop everything and go and play that or spend all the money, and then you spend millions of dollars, hundreds of millions of dollars, took all this money from these investors, and they want their money back. And then you end up just wasting money, and then some studios can obviously weather the storm because of tax write-offs or because of other things. But if you're a small team and you make this game and it generally flops or it doesn't make as much money, or it struggles within like the first couple of years to even break even or maintain a quote-unquote good number of player base or keep a high player count, because that's what everyone looks at. If you're under so many players or it is a huge dip, there's no reason to even bother, or the game is basically a failure. And like you spend all that money, you spend all that time, and at no point did you stop and like look and say, well, maybe we shouldn't make this game. But then it's like, well, what game can we make that will make that kind of money, or make a game like I said, make that type of money and be able to appease what people want, because it is so expensive to make a game, and it is like such a hard investment to do, because if you say, oh, we'll just make a single player action story game, like kind of like I don't know, like Last of Us 2 or Last of Us or Last of Us 2 kind of game like that, where it's just like a story and you just play, and like maybe you like the story, but is that going to sell a million copies? Maybe, if it's really good, but unless you have a big IP or have a lot of support already, you're not even going to touch that number. It's like, is that really what people want? Yeah, I don't know. Like I do feel bad, because I think maybe the game will be good considering it's coming out. Maybe I'll check it out because it's coming out in January, which is like going to be like the first big game. And if it doesn't do good in that first month, it's not going to do good later on. Maybe it'll be able to kind of build back some support. But once like Call of Duty, GTA, or any of the other big games have their kind of big updates or season like releases or expansions, goodbye to that. And same with like other games like Marathon, where it's like, why, like Bungie is basically going to be finished at that point. I don't know. And then you have like AI also in there, where everyone's investing in AI, and everything's more expensive now. And like all the games are made with AI or has to be made with AI, because so many industries are so built on with AI. And there is so much money like being put in where it's like you have to do good, and now a lot of these, the rise of AI is like basically making everything more expensive now, where if you want to buy like RAM or like a CPU or a GPU or a graphics card, you have to like pay even more than you were paying before, because before it was just scalper prices, but now it's like literally the industry and the people making them don't even want to really sell them, or they only want to sell them to like these AI data centers or to these other big companies that are like managing that, and not even going to sell to like the public or the main like public people who want it. And now everything's going to be expensive. So I guess now maybe the Steam machine might get delayed because of this. Like, who knows how they're going to respond? Because if you're like a company like Steam, and you're like, hey, look, we're a big industry. We have a lot of money. We can't just. If you want to release this, there's a lot of money behind this. Who gets to decide where everything goes, or how the industry is going to be? Like, you have to lower prices, or you have to sell to us, or you have to like basically build a whole new infrastructure to like, maintain what we want. It's like everything is kind of like in a weird. Everything's kind of weird. Because everyone obviously you want things that, like you said, you want the industry to be cheap. You would think the industry would be cheap, and you think that because back then making a game was harder, because there wasn't like the Unreal Engine, there wasn't all of these like engines or like software that was designed where now anyone can be a game developer, or anyone can make a small indie game. But even these big studios now, everything is so expensive, and maybe that's because of corporate greed or some like bureaucratic, like video game red tape and bloat that's like made it so where you have these big studios spending so much money, and they're spending so much money to make the games profits, like advertise the game, and then behind the scenes there's even more money being made, because everyone wants to get their big paycheck, and everyone's so greedy. Where now it's even more expensive. You think that it would cost games, you could make a game like, I don't know, like I don't know, like a Call of Duty. You can make a game like Call of Duty, or make a Call of Duty and make it for even half the budget that it's probably worth. Or like was it like Spider-Man 2 for the PlayStation 5 costs like 250 million or something like that, and you can make it for under 50 million or under even 10 million, because you know the infrastructure is there. The engine is already there. You don't have to like basically build from scratch, and you have people who obviously are trained and know what they do. Because you know back then, you know, being like a programmer or being a game designer in like the early 2090s was really difficult, because most people just didn't really know how to build stuff like that or manage stuff like that. You know, like if you now you have like schools and classes and entire programs designed to like teach people how to code or how to use these, basically build and create and design in these engines, when these engines didn't even exist that long ago, back in like that kind of early days where you really had to make your own engine and kind of figure out how to do it. I don't know, this is a weird thing to see. Hopefully things do get cheaper or better, but who knows? You know, the industry's has always been in a weird position, and I'm not sure how most people feel. Because I'm sure there's a lot of people who kind of can see that there is maybe going to be a bubble, or there is a bubble that's going to maybe pop, and there's a lot of people trying to get out while they still can, or sell, or kind of like cash out while they can, because they know that any game that they make isn't going to make enough money, or it has to like fulfill certain roles, or industry just the gaming community just isn't willing to like buy or purchase the game, and any like chance of like trying to make it is just going to take too long, because the industry keeps shifting and moving, which is kind of what we see now. Where, you know, if you're like a game where you're told like, hey, in 2020 we're making the new PlayStation 5 or the PlayStation 5 and Series X, and you're like, oh, okay, we're still working on this game, or a hero shooter, or we're still like basically behind like 5 to 10 years. Like 5 years behind because of how the industry is, and now everything's even changing more. Where now people are even becoming more anti, I guess, anti like hero shooters or free to play. Where now the industry is changing, but people don't want this, you know, generic over-the-shoulder action story-driven game, but they also don't want, you know, free to play slop, or they don't want like games filled with AI that's filled with predatory like things, like predatory microtransactions, which has always been there. I don't know. It's like I said. It just sucks at how this is kind of where it's become. Because you know, you always wanted to get better. You wanted the gaming industry to feel fun and interesting. You know, people were excited for the next big game, but now a lot of people don't really care, or they only care about one game. And even if that one game isn't really that good, it probably isn't that good. And you know, you're only playing that like a GTA. Like most people only care about GTA. They don't care about, you know, High Guard or any of these other games that are coming out, or these other experimental games that are like, or free-to-play games that are made by these small indie studios, because you know it's weird, it's not popular, it feels janky, it feels like too familiar, or doesn't stand out enough, and so you spend all that money and now it's basically wasted, or you're wasting, you know, all these investors or these big like investors or asset managers who are like saying, hey, you have to make this game, or maybe you make a game and it's a little, I guess, woke, or maybe, you know, filled with some type of messages that people don't want to hear anymore, or the industry is shifting, you know, about like what type of games people want. Like you look at a game like Concord, and you supposedly that game costs over $500 million, and it's like, well, why did it cost so much money, and like why didn't anyone like stop and say anything? When you listen to how like the executives at Sony and at all these people talked about the game, like this game was going to be like the next big thing, and was $1 billion industry, and there's going to be so much content not only for the game, but you know, stories and like movies and TV shows, and basically an entire multimedia empire built off of this kind of game. And then now it's gone, and everyone kind of forgot about it. But yeah, I don't know. I guess we kind of finished up now. I didn't think it would take that long, kind of going on my little rant. But I guess we'll probably. I guess let's. You know, I think we'll probably take a pause here. I don't know if I want to do the other arenas. Maybe I want to kind of just jump into the DLC. Maybe we'll come back at the end once we're max level, and we can kind of speed through. We'll do the Cistern and the Slaughter Star 5000, all that, or 6000, 5000, all at once, because I think that's maybe what we want to do, because I kind of want to just jump in the DLC now that we're kind of pushing 60. We're pushing 60, you know, by then we'll be 72, maybe once we finish the first DLC or second DLC. But we'll maybe, because we want to be at least 72 for the fourth DLC, because how hard it is. But I think maybe that's the idea. Well, let's check out what we got. I think we got another Butcher, which I think we really want. Super Ball, we don't really need that. Like Devoted, yeah, that's fine. Let's throw you on there. We didn't use our no pew pew, but I think that's fine. One point there. You have a lot of guardian points, but I'll save that for later. But I think that's gonna be it. Pardon me. I think I'll see you back for maybe for the first DLC, the Handsome Jackpot. Maybe, I don't know. Maybe I'm in a better mood now. I'll probably maybe make more videos. I know I kind of went off, kind of took a bit of a weird break, and now I'm like back playing because I had to deal with other personal stuff. And I was just I was kind of like wasn't in the mood to play, or I guess record. I guess is the best way to put it. But yeah, I guess that's gonna be it for this playthrough. Be sure to check out all the other parts. Hopefully, I'll have another part out sooner than later. Maybe it'll be DLC 1. I don't know if we want to do the other slaughter stuff. Maybe we will. Maybe I'll just do it randomly if we get time. I'll just jump in the DLC. I'm not sure what I want to do, but that's gonna be it for this playthrough. Be sure to check out all their stuff, and I'll see you guys later. Goodbye.